Start up in 500s, I fell down the seats there, right?
Okay, today on the bench we have a Dak Mark 10. Probably one of my favorite looking radios, and one of my least favorite to work on. Just a pain in the butt because they look so nice, because they're so big, just makes them an absolute pain in the butt to work on. Everything's way down in, either from the top side or the bottom side. Actually, just first, let's just do a little bit of listening here. There's a little bit of skip coming in.
Alpha Lima, 2100, that's low.
Just a little bit on sideband.
Doggone, if I could make any noise like what's coming into my radio station, I can leave this radio with a smile on my face. And if I'm making any kind of noise like I'm getting to my radio, I can leave this station, walk away from this station, and with a smile on my face. On the wall, so you can look what they made me do. And you know what's going on. We can live that way.
Yep, the bye-bye-bye crowd.
I think that was Dog. I think that was Dog in there. 706. I heard the band. We heard you come up in there, and we're gonna wave that hand right back.
Yeah, not much sideband right now. Just the big boomers on AM.
In downtown Birmingham, and I say in a big old hello, 141, getting on down.
Yeah, that sounds like one of my battery chargers kicked on. In any case, now that we've listened to a bunch of people talking about absolutely nothing. So anyhow, these are nice radios. The customer got this, he got this from a friend of his that passed away. So this belonged to us, it's a Silent Keys radio, was a friend of his, and he got this from him. Wanted it restored because, it's got personal, meaning to him. So, a little bit of value to him personally. So he wanted it completely redone. Basically said, do whatever, if it was yours, do whatever to it that you would do if it was your own. So that's basically what was done. It did work, but it had a high carrier on sideband, was the main complaint on this. I have replaced all the electrolytic capacitors. Let's see, replaced some of the diodes on the, there's a power supply board. There's multiple power supply sections in this because this is a hybrid radio, so it is solid state and vacuum tube. It's basically an all solid state radio, but they pulled the driver and the final transistors out, tossed them in a trash can, and dropped in a vacuum tube for the driver and final. Otherwise, it's a solid state radio. But it does have several power supply circuits because it's got a negative bias supply rail. It's got the B plus, or the high voltage line, for the vacuum tube circuit in this, and it also has the low voltage supply. It supplies the normal solid state radio. Some of the diodes on that, and depending when these were made, because these came, depending what time frame these radios were bought in, they had different problems. And all of these things have problems. That's just one of those things. If you own one of these, you probably already know that. They are just prone to break. Now, you can't say it's just all manufacturing. You got to remember, it is an old radio. It's a solid state radio with some tubes thrown in, so that adds a lot of heat to the radio. Now, I'm assuming probably the original owner did it to this. They've done some modifications. Now, at one point, this had extra channels, and I got to contact a customer. I think he had said about reinstalling them. I'll contact him, because honestly, trying to add extra channels to a vacuum tube radio is a pain in the butt, because you cannot broadband output power on a vacuum tube radio as easily as you can a solid state RF final section. But I'll ask him. But apparently, it's not apparent. It did, because there's lots of cut traces on the bottom of the board that have been repaired. But the original owner, I guess, got scared. I don't know if back in the day there was a wave of FCC crackdowns going around or what, but I guess he got scared and he took the extra channels out of it. So it's back to its original 40-channel configuration. Clarifier is unlocked. Other than that, I don't think there's any modifications. I'm just sitting here thinking. Modulation limiter was removed. I reinstalled that. Other than that, electronically, it's all original. So the only real modification right now that exists electronically would be the clarifier. Physically, there's a lot of modifications. For starters, I'm pretty sure that back panel's not original. They did come in 2 versions, and it's been so long since I worked on a Dak 10, without going back and looking at pictures, I can't say for 100% sure, but I'm pretty darn sure that is not the original rear cover. Now, I know they came in 2 different versions, the rear covers, but even then, I still don't think that's the original cover. I don't think they were galvanized steel, and it just looks homemade, but very well made. Somebody did a really good job making it. And the modifications that they did to this are actually good. They added a fan. Now, usually I'm not a big fan of fans because they're so blasted loud. So one of the things that makes this okay is they installed a 120 volt fan, yet they had some dropping resistors here. They've got 2 I think they're 440 ohm resistors in series, and they're 15 watt resistors. That adds up to 880 ohms of resistance added in series. Now, and there's a toggle switch right here to turn it on and off. Now, if I turn this fan on, you'll notice something. You don't hear anything. That's why I can just barely hear it, and if I put the cover on this, yeah, I'd probably never hear it. It's really reduced the speed on that fan. It's blowing air, don't get me wrong. It's going to be drawing air from the cabinet because it sucks or blows air out. So it's sucking air into the radio and then blows it out the fan. But they did that in a very nice way, because normally if you add a fan to something, you're basically either pressurizing the cabinet or you're turning it into a vacuum chamber, depending on if you're blowing air into it or sucking air out. In this case, they've got the vacuum chamber effect going. You're sucking air out, so air has to come into the radio. But they did that in a way to try and direct that airflow. So they've added a lot of foam to this radio. Foam around the speaker. They've got tape all over the place, trying to basically make like a gasket. They drilled a bunch of holes in this back panel, and they stuck, it looks like, I'm thinking maybe like a soffit vent. Once I get done looking over the top here, I'll disconnect it and we can flip it over and you can take a look at the back of it as well. But it looks kind of like a soffit vent. But it was well done. They drilled some holes, put a nice chrome cover on the back. So from the back side it looks really nice. Like I say, it looks like they really took their time. It was obviously bent on a sheet metal brake. They notched the corners. I mean, they did a really nice job. And on the bottom side, there are a bunch of vents as well. So that draws air up through all of these vents, and all of these vents are located over in this section, the high voltage or the vacuum tube side. So there's a lot of big heavy resistors on the bottom side. What that's going to do is allow the air to get sucked in here, blow across those components that are getting hot to cool them down. Air gets drawn up through the bottom, up to the top side here, and then gets evacuated out. Air is being drawn across here. It's going to help to keep the heat from the vacuum tube area away from the solid state area. Now, don't get me wrong, this plate's going to get hot because it's close to this, but they're trying to direct the airflow so the heat stays away from the solid state area. Well-placed resistors. They know those resistors are going to get hot when that fan's turned on, so they put them right in front of the fan, so the air is blowing across those. Like I say, just really well thought out. Somebody obviously didn't just go grab a piece of sheet metal off the scrap pile and just, we'll just, grab their sheet metal snips and just whack this thing out. They did a nice job. The top side was extremely dirty. I actually finished all of the electronic work on this, so replacing all the caps, replacing other parts that needed to be done in this about 2 days ago, but I've had this thing drying out. The top, and I really didn't have to clean other than just wiping dirt off in this area over here. But the solid state area, yeah, you can only do so much wiping because there's lots of parts on here. Over here is not bad. You can actually get down there with a rag and wipe. But over here, yeah, the board's filled with components, and it was just grungy and nasty. It was really, honestly, with these things, because of the problems they have, you really need to be able to see the board. So I had to clean this thing off. So I saturated this thing with 99.9% isopropyl alcohol, cleaned it off really well, and it actually cleaned up really, really nice. Stand up here, I can't see the viewfinder. So you can see it is nice and shiny now. Looks really good. And the reason I had to do that was, it's not so much a cosmetic thing. Of course, we don't want dirt in there. Dirt gets on components that, eventually if it gets deep enough, of course that's going to act as an insulator. But the main problem you have, or one of the biggest problems you have with these radios, are pass-through connections. So yes, this is a double-sided circuit board. You can see all the little traces on the top here. Well, there's traces on the bottom side. But these do not have through-plated holes. So the vias are, the hole in the board where you connect a trace from, let's say, the top side to a trace on the bottom side. Modern day boards, they would be plated through. So there's actually metal plating on the circuit board that connects the top and bottom layers. This one ain't like that. And this is an older CB radio, and it's honestly, all CB radios use cheap circuit boards. Now, the more modern radios, current production ones, especially your surface mount radios, they're starting to use really good quality FR4 fiberglass boards. Yeah, this ain't that, folks. And neither are any of the other boards made back in the day, with maybe 2 or 3 exceptions. But yeah, the majority of your radios have these cheaper quality boards. The big problem with these is, because of those vias, they had to connect a trace from the top to the bottom. So what they do is they use a little pass-through. It basically looks like a finishing, or not a finishing nail, it looks like a nail head. It's just a piece of copper wire with one end smashed flat. It's dropped through the board from the top side, and then it's soldered on the top and the bottom of the board. The problem is, those solder connections fail. Because these boards are not extremely high quality, they expand and contract with heat. And every time it does that, it's stressing those solder joints. And unfortunately, the solder joint that always fails are the ones on the top of the board. They never fail on the bottom. They never fail on the side that's easy to get to. They always fail on the side that is loaded with components. So you have to try and find those pass-through joints in amongst all these parts. Pray that there aren't any underneath of parts, because they frequently do that. You'll find those vias underneath of stuff like electrolytic capacitors, or there might be one crammed up underneath of the transformer here or something. And just getting in to resolder those can be a chore, because they're surrounded by parts. So like most of these up here at the front edge had failed to some extent. Come on. Focus, focus, focus. All of these right here had failed. You can see they're nice and shiny little balls now. Well, that's what should be there. They were all cracked out before. So yeah, I just had to go through this thing and check all of these pass-through connections. And anytime I saw one that was suspect looking, resolder it. Now, usually the ones that have a lot of solder on them, they hold up fine. The problem childs are usually going to be the ones that there's not a lot of solder on, and you'll see that it's cracked out around that little, what I call a nail head, that flattened piece of that wire. It's just, you'll see a little halo around. It looks like a cold solder joint like in anything else, but yeah, it's, if you apply a good bit of solder to these things, they actually hold up really well. But yeah, in manufacturing, when these things were soldered at the factory, wave soldering, yeah, a lot of times you won't see a lot of solder on the top. So always check those, because if they haven't failed yet, they will at some point if they don't have much solder on them. So as you can see, like I said, solid state and vacuum tube. The little board over here, I did replace all 4 of these diodes. This came in 2 configurations. It came, I think it was the earlier, or it might have been the later, I honestly can't remember. But one version of the radio had 4 diodes, because this is just a bridge rectifier circuit. But one of the versions of the radio had 4 diodes. The other version of the radio, which is what this one was, had 8 diodes. All they did was took 4 more of the exact same diodes and bodged them on to the bottom side of the circuit board. So there were 2 of them in parallel. That's just not a good idea. I mean, you can parallel up diodes to increase the rating, but yeah, it's just, honestly, it's not best practice. It's just so much easier. Just put in bigger diodes. So that's what I did. I took all 8 of the originals out and just stuck in 4 larger ones from the top side. So there's a lot of your vacuum tube tuning circuit back here, your final circuit and tuning. Take a look-see here. Another problem area in these, probably be easiest to see when I flip the radio around so you can see the back. There's a huge row of these wire tie posts in these things, and they stand up about that far. They're really long. Problem is, again, heat, movement. Wiring harnesses are going to flex a little bit as stuff heats and cools down with expansion. Puts a lot of stress on those really long pins because they're sticking up so high. And that puts stress on the solder joints, so always check that row of solder joints, and those are a pain in the butt to get to. And I'm not talking about the pass-through joints here, if you can see those. So there's a big row of those pass-through joints, but in front of that there's a bunch of wire tie posts, and those are the ones you really got to watch. So on the underside, again, pain in the butt to work on, they're underneath of a metal flange. Yeah, we can't do anything easy. So let me turn off the power supply here, get everything unhooked, and get the camera up here a little bit. Yeah, and still a lot of my cables and whatnot are out on the bench because I literally just finished the alignment on this before I fired up the camera. Okay, so there you can see all of those wire tie posts I was just talking about. Big row runs all the way across the front, and then there's another row right here. Check all those solder connections on the bottom side. Another problem you'll see with these things is the lights for the indicators. Okay, inside of these 2 little plastic light diffusers that have, you know, little deflection. If you ever take one of these things off, there's little separators in there, so light can't get from one bulb over into the next little chamber. The problem is they had these rubber grommets and they glued them, and the glue that they used gets rock hard. And very frequently, when you try to replace one of these, because it is a light bulb, it's going to fail. Just a fact of life. It's going to happen eventually. But when you go to pull that bulb out, the metal base pulls off, the glass bulb stays inside, and it falls inside of these blasted things. These can be tricky to get off. They're really hard to get out for starters. You got to take these 2 nuts off, and anytime you have to service any of this stuff, do a lot of this finger crossing. You've got a really good chance any nut that you see on the back side of this faceplate, when you turn it, it's either going to break loose from the meter face, but that's usually what happens. All these nuts attach the meter faces to this panel here, the whole way across. The problem is the other side of that is embedded in the plastic. They have a tendency of breaking loose and spinning. Then you can't get the nuts off. I see that very, very frequently on these. And to get these light boxes out, you have to take out two of those nuts on either side here. You see the little plastic flange sticks up right there. That nut for the meter is actually what's holding these light boxes on. So yeah, they're just tricky. Now if the bulbs break off and fall in, you do not have to take these the whole way out, because that's again another pain in the butt. You've got all of this wire going between the meters and all this stuff here wrapping around those light boxes. My suggestion is, if you can get both of the nuts off, which like I was lucky because I had to change a bunch of these light bulbs. I was lucky I got them off. Big key there is make sure you get all this, whatever they used for glue is Loctite, which is really unnecessary because they do have lock washers. But try and get most of that off, and then also apply a little bit of solvent, acetone or something to soften it up. That's the main reason I think these studs usually break loose out of the meters, is the nut is stuck to the stud because of that glue. If you remove most of it and then soften up the glue, you can usually get the nuts off. But all you have to do is just slightly pry this thing out, because the other problem is the bottom side of these light boxes, there are no nuts holding it in. They only have these flanges on the top. The bottom side is in behind all those toggle switches. They kind of come in behind. It just, yeah, the design sucks. There's no other way to say it. But what you can do is, if the light bulb breaks off from the metal base, push the bulb, because it's going to happen. The bulb's going to fall into these little light boxes, and you want to get that out of there. Take those two nuts off. You can just pry that thing back just far enough to turn the radio upside down, and they'll fall out. That's all you need to do. So yeah, I've replaced what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these bulbs. You'll see the black stuff on there. That's glue that I've added. Now this stuff does not get rock hard that I used. It's a rubber type cement. It's a speaker cement is what it is, so it's kind of rubbery. So yeah, that stuff, 10 years from now, a light bulb needs to be changed. I won't have to worry about the bases breaking off. Now somebody had replaced most of these bulbs, and those honestly were most of the ones that I had to replace. I don't know what kind of glue they used, but the bulbs that they used were not purpose-built like this. They didn't have the metal base with the wires already attached to them. Now just turn around here and grab the pack out of the drawer. They're 6.3 volt bulbs, okay? They weren't like this. What the bulbs that they had used were just the bulb, no metal base. It was just a glass envelope with two wires sticking out of the backside, and then they tacked little tiny pieces of wire onto that, stuck them in the hole, and glued them. Whatever that glue was that they used, it was hard and brittle. It reminded me of model cement, but it was corrosive. You just breathe on the wires and they'd snap off, and the bulbs were falling in. But yeah, I've replaced those with the proper, correct style bulbs. Not a lot else here on the top side, I guess. Oh, one thing. These circuit boards in these, I don't want to say they're, how do I put this gently? They're clones. That's basically probably the easiest way to put it. These circuit boards, you look at this, you're probably thinking, it's a Cybernet. No, it's not. Really, it's not. It's a clone of a Cybernet. It does have the layout of a Cybernet. Now, this is just from what I've just heard over the years and what I've read. But apparently these are clones. They're not real Cybernets. It's based off of the Cybernet circuit board designs that were used back in the day. It has a VCO block, the RF mixing circuits. They're all pretty much the same. It's not actually a Cybernet board. And that's, I guess, one of the reasons why the quality wasn't as good. And one other thing to note, as I said, this is basically a regular radio, but the RF driver and final section is missing. So you can actually see that here. So yeah, the board was designed to have a solid state RF PA section in this thing. Solid state PA section. They just removed, or they didn't install any of the solid state components and supporting circuitry, and just ran a coax cable out to the vacuum tube circuit, and then back to the board here. So I think that pretty much covers most of the stuff on the top. Let's get this flipped over. Let me get this BNC cable out of the way here. Get that put up back in its home where it should be. Again, get the camera up out of the way. And remember, anytime you're working on one of these things, if the radio's plugged in, deadly lethal voltage is in this. 400 and it's around 450 volts, I think, the high voltage section here. So just keep that in mind when you're working on one of these. Has vacuum tubes, so it's got really high voltages. Give you one heck of a nasty bite and can also kill you. So be careful. Electrolytic caps were also replaced on the bottom side here, and you probably saw from the top side the can cap was replaced. Those 4 diodes that were bodged on, they were bodged on the bottom side of the board here, so those have been removed. Another thing with this board, I don't know if you saw, there's a little heat sink stand that comes out here. There's an audio amplifier IC right here. It's got an aluminum heat sink that comes out and then has a screw that goes down to the board. I don't know if you can see that or not. There's a buckle in the board. Within an area of about that diameter, the board drops down in height about that much in an area that big around. It's just whoop, buckled in from that heat sink. Is bent up a little bit on the top side, and it's been pulling up on the board all these decades, and it's like a bowl right there. It's just a huge depression in that circuit board. I am not going to try to straighten that out. This thing has been sitting like that since the 70s, so the last thing I want to do is come in here, bend that bracket, and then in a period of, 1 minute, all that, what's taken decades for it to slowly deform upward, push that thing back down and have the circuit board break. So I'm just going to leave it as it is. The board has like I say, over a period of decades from the 1970s to now, has slowly buckled down. We're just going to leave it like that because I think I'd stand a higher chance of damaging this circuit board if I try straightening out that bracket. A lot of work had to be done down here. Man, the solder work on this thing was just horrible. And that's just part of these radios. The soldering on these radios from the factory was not that fantastic, but that was compounded by very sloppy soldering work from God knows how many other people possibly over the decades. That's been taken care of. Again, clean the bottom side of the board off because I couldn't see anything on the bottom side. This thing had so much flux residue on it, it was just ridiculous. All those solder connections I was telling you about that are hard to get to, a little bit more light here so you can see. Here's that row of pass-through connections. The problem is all of those wire tie posts are underneath of this flange right here. You try and look down from the top, you can see they disappear. Yeah, so trying to resolder those is a pain in the butt because they're up underneath of this flange. So yeah, just again, poor design. And what makes these such a pain in the butt to replace electrolytic capacitors on is when you have these things standing up on edge so you can get to the solder side to desolder the component and then grab the part from the other side, this depth is what gets you. There's that much depth from the top of my finger here, so actually it's like that much in space from the bottom edge here to the circuit board. So you've got to try to get in here with a desoldering tool. You got the radio standing up on edge. It's just you're at arm's reach trying to reach around the top side, trying to reach around the underside. It's just, until you've done one of these, it's even hard to describe. It's just difficult because of that. Yeah, like I said, you can just see where the solder mask is missing all over this board. This thing has been soldered on year after year after year after year. This thing has had hackery and butchery and unhacked and hacked again and solder connections fixed and stuff screwed up and circuit traces ripped. It's just, this board has had a really, really rough life. I mean, there's traces just completely missing off the board. The repair is fine. There's a piece of wire there, but yeah, you can just see the solder mask missing scratches in it all over the circuit board. It's just, poor radio. What can you say? I did replace this resistor right here. I don't know what somebody did. It looks like this transformer, this is a double-tuned transformer, between the couples between the driver and the final tube. It looks from the top side like maybe somebody had taken that out before. The wires don't look like they're factory wrapped around that. I don't know. Maybe it melted. That's You see that in these. People will try to get too much power out of these things, and they end up melting parts. I always say, keep the radios to work as they were designed to work, and they'll work fine for a long time. Go cranking the power levels up, you end up smoking parts. And that's one of the parts in these radios that'll get smoked, is this coupling transformer between the driver and the final. Yeah, I get the feeling that was out and worked on, but the resistor right here, they had just cut the lead, apparently took the transformer out, did whatever they had to do to it, stuck it back in, and then just bodge soldered the wires beside each other. I'm going to let that in, so I changed that too. So, otherwise, good looking radio on the bottom side. Everything else was okay over here. Oh, and the back side. Now, granted, it is upside down now, but there's the back side, and there's that chrome. Like I say, I'm thinking like a soffit vent. It's almost what it reminds me of. Or if you know anything about heavy duty, medium duty trucks, you'll see these on especially older trucks. They had something like this on the back of the cab, and it was even pickup trucks have them nowadays. It might not look like this, but it's a vent. So when you slam your door shut, air can get in and out of the cab. There's a rubber flap inside, but it almost reminds me either something like that, or like I say, like a soffit vent is just kind of what it reminds me of. Yeah, I am assuming those two holes is probably where the extra channel switches were at one point in time. Like I say, it looks like this thing was made. I just don't think this is an original rear cover, this galvanized metal. There's no factory stickers on it. Just the finish, you can see where somebody ground it out by hand. It was not punched on a press. All of these holes were cut out. They did a really neat job, but yeah, they did a nice job on the cooling. Like I say, somebody really thought this out well. Suck cool air in, blow the hot air out, draw the heat away from the solid state components. I mean, it really well planned. They did even make a little access door, so they even bent up a proper little plate to stick there. You know, like I say, you can see it was handmade. No doubt, it's not machine made, but like I say, they did a really nice job. Somebody really took their time there. So I think that's about it on this. There's all the parts that I replaced, and all these little wires. Actually, they're wires for all the light bulbs that were in there. There's little, yeah, actually, there's one of them. This little pain in the butts right there. You can see what I was talking about. See, it was just a wire. They just soldered two wires to the back. But yeah, whatever this black glue that they used, it corroded the wires off of the lights. You just touch these things and bink, just like that. They break off, and then the bulbs fall in. But oh, I changed the fuse. I don't know why. There's a board-mounted fuse on the top side. For starters, this wasn't a pigtail fuse. Somebody had replaced this at some point in time. And just, I mean, that's common. You'll see people solder wires on it. I did use a proper pigtail fuse. Main reason I replaced this was it's not that it's bad. It's the wrong value. I always say, before you turn a radio on, check the fuses. That way, if there's anything wrong in the radio, if there's a dead short, when you turn it on, you don't have to worry about smoking stuff like the main power transformer because the fuse is too big. Fuse was wrong, so I did install a proper size fuse. Somewhere down in there, there's all the original diodes that I took out. They're all matching. Now, I honestly don't know. I think this, if I remember right, I think this customer said the guy that owned this before him, the Silent Key, had recapped this a long time ago, apparently. I think he may have. All the caps match, but I am honestly not 100% sure that these are original caps to this radio. What kind of gives it away is the glue that's on the bottom of these caps does not match. There was no glue on the circuit board. And it almost looks like these capacitors were all wet. There's like rusty deposits, little brown spots. I don't know if it shows up in the camera, but all these caps, they look like they were in a bucket of water with bunch of rusty bolts for a while. Other than this one is definitely original, but all the low voltage caps, I think these may have been replaced at some point in time. I can't say for sure. Don't work on these often enough to remember what brand and color that the caps are in these are. I'd have to go. I think I've done at least one, if not two videos on some of these that I've restored, I think. I'd have to go back and look at them. I don't think they had these purple Sham Hawa or whatever that off-brand that is. But yeah, I don't know. I think those are. He may have replaced them and used caps because they weren't new. And the owner said, yeah, I think he recapped it with used caps. Why would you do that? But yeah, any case. One nice thing, once I get this completely put back together, I'll fire the camera back up. Cabinet's in nice condition. One nice thing is, something you'll occasionally see is the screws aren't factory or they're missing, especially the ones that go along the front edge of the faceplate. Luckily with this, all of the screws and all of the original aluminum trim discs for the faceplate there along the front edge, they're all here and matching. So it does look really nice once it's put back together. So I need to call the customer and ask him about this circuit modification, because like I say, he had said it had been demodded, and you can clearly see how boogered up that board is there. It's just, man, whew, that's been hacked at there. There's some definite nastiness going on in that area. He still has some of the dropping resistors there, but I need to see if he wants the extra channels put back in it. Honestly, I'm going to suggest to him, don't. Leave it as it is. It's a tube radio. It's not worth the hassle of trying to get extra channels in this thing and try and get the power balanced. It's not worth the hassle. Besides that, I don't want to even. It is hacked up as that is right there. I'm probably going to end up damaging some of those traces trying to remove all that crap and get more wires soldered back down in there. It just, yeah, poor board quality. That's another thing, actually, before I turn the camera off. If you do work on these, make sure you have the tip temperature on your desoldering iron and your soldering iron turned down. These boards are fragile. Well, I don't want to say the boards are fragile, but the copper traces, if you use too much heat on these, I can guarantee you're going to pull the traces off of the board. It doesn't take much heat to delaminate the copper traces on these off of the circuit board material itself. So be very careful when you're working on these. A lot of these circuit traces when I was replacing electrolytic capacitors, the traces were already ripped off, so I had to do some repairs. But yeah, just be careful when you're working on these. These are known for having very fragile boards. These were also known, there was apparently a bunch of these radios got out that had horrible boards. Apparently when they got etched, when the circuit boards themselves were made, they didn't get cleaned off properly, and the acid was left on the circuit boards. And over the years, the acid continued to etch at the copper, and the traces just get eaten in half. It could be a brand new radio, never used, and you'd come, a couple years later, you'd turn it on to use it, and it wouldn't work, and it would be because all the copper traces had been eaten in half. So, yeah, just be careful with these things, man. They're so fragile, they're so easy to damage. So let me get her put back together, and we'll be back. Okay, so you can see I got her all back together now. As I said, the cabinet's in really nice condition. Does look like it had been refinished. So the top cover is original. The back panel, and actually I forgot to mention that bottom panel was made, because that would have had factory vent slots in it, and they were taken out. And there's nice little discs were installed. Again, they kind of look like soffit vent discs as well, with screens in them. So I've got the fan turned on. Like I say, did a really nice job the way that guy set this up for cooling. That it draws the air up and in across the solid state area, then into the vacuum tube section where most of the heat is, and then out at the back of the radio. So yep. Other than that, nice radio. It works well now. Had the carrier problem, which is the one problem that the customer definitely noted. It had a really big carrier on sideband. That's gone. That was actually caused by a bad electrolytic capacitor. when I first started on this, I think I forgot to mention that I had tried to null out the carrier with the 2 carrier balance adjustments in this, and there just wasn't enough adjustment. That was actually due to a bad electrolytic capacitor, so when I recapped it, that took care of that problem. Both the tubes in this were fine, no need to replace those. There wasn't anything wrong with them. They both tested good and strong. They were not original tubes, I don't think. I'm pretty sure these did not come with realistic tubes, but this has both of them, the driver and the final, are realistic. They're gold. Or back when there used to be a Radio Shack, but realistic back in the day. They also sold tubes branded under their name, but they were the gold plate. They had gold-plated pins, and it was like their lifelong, I think, was the kind of like catchphrase or trade name for them, and they had a lifetime guarantee. What as good as a lifetime guarantee is for a company that's not really around anymore, but but in any case, yeah, those weren't replaced. So I'll just leave the camera run here for a few minutes, and I'll just scan around the channels here. Did contact a customer. I told him it had, as he suspected, it had originally had extra channels. I told him, I was like, yeah, I can put them back in, but you're not going to get even output power. And on the receive sensitivity, the circuit can usually broadband far enough to cover all the expanded channels, but you'll never get even output power across the full range of the expanded channels because it has a vacuum tube final circuit. So he said, don't worry about it. He said, just leave it as is. So yeah, pretty much the only thing other than, like I said, mechanical stuff, the covers had been the bottom and rear covers were made. The only real modification to this thing is the clarifier, and that had been previously done. So other than that, all original radio now. So we'll just listen to it for a little bit and see what's on air. And yes, it is a noisy day today. Oh, then again, I can probably get that down a little bit. Yeah, how's that? That just dropped it about, what, 2.5 dB? Or 2.5 S units, I think, the noise floor. Yeah. I had a couple battery chargers plugged in over there. And I know they're noisy, I just forgot to unplug them. Sideband, just nothing on sideband today. All the skips on AM. Was a little bit earlier, but not much. And actually here recently, if the skip's good for AM, or if the skip is active on AM during the day, usually sideband will pick up pretty good at night. So I'll have to check that later this evening. Yeah, there's somebody bleeding over at least 5 channels. I can turn the high voltage off since I'm not transmitting. And just in case you're not aware, unlike most other tube CB radios, when you turn them on, the high voltage is applied to or is available at the driver and the final circuits. In this radio, they added an extra switch, this standby transmit switch. When it's in the standby mode, that is directly after the rectifier diodes and the high voltage circuit and breaks that line. So there's no high voltage present actually in the circuitry. It's only at the power supply, and when you flip, and you can see the lights really quick blink when I first flipped it into transmit, because when you put it into transmit, that applies high voltage to the vacuum tube circuits, but that also adds the filter capacitors into circuits, so that drain you see, basically the lights getting dim, is when the high voltage caps first charge up. God, could these people's audio get much more distorted? Whew. There's somebody tuning up an amplifier, maybe? Yeah, Skip's starting to fade out. 22 and 28 were pretty active earlier. There's somebody on sideband. There's somebody from Pensacola, Florida.
Mr. B said you did not have to hit another gear. You own by your cockpit. Hey, go, do what you got to do, man. You ain't got to say nothing no more.
Jesus.
Hey, go, play more,
Man, that guy needs his radio worked on. He definitely has no modulation limiter, and he's got a... I don't know if you can hear that in the video, but he's got a hell of a background squeal. But these guys don't care what they sound like. All they care about is needle swing. They don't care if they sound like a pile of horse poo. Jeez, I can't even stand listening to people like that. This guy, I can hear him on 11. 13. Yeah, he's still there a little bit.
He's been there and gone. He said he just... waiting on 60 dB. Hey, other pocket, that's who that was way back there waiting on 60 dB, trying to key on rhythm and blues. But let him know, if he come out with his hands in there, easy choke chain from around his neck. If the pocket rhythm and blues roll it on.
Is somebody going to talk, or are they just tuning up an amplifier? Kind of get the feeling they're tuning an amplifier up, because you can watch. They've got it keyed, but the needle goes, ooh, and it's like they're peaking their amp right now. Probably got an old tuber. There they had her peaked.
Got about 30. You got about 30 dB.
And feel free to stop watching at any time. I'm just recording a little bit on air, because people occasionally ask me, like, I want to hear what the radio sounds like, hear what the receive sounds like. So I figure every once in a while I get a radio done, I'll just let it play for a while and just flip around the channels. So not going to be any nifty tricks or anything. Just going to listen to the radio. God, people are so distorted.
Mr. B, number 2 driver. Bye-bye. I wasn't playing. I had one more gear
We can. God, hopefully there's somebody up here on sideband. Nope.
Down there in the big D.
Oh, there we go.
Do it again, your friend. Boy, one thing.
Negative contact on that station calling Florida. I heard you there. There's a bird just to a station in there now. You just have to do it. Kind of making it difficult for me to hear, but it's easy. See, Alpha Power 069 in the same power. We're listening for you. We stand by. I heard you in there, but they're covering you up there. Could you QSY to the low side of 37? Please QSY to the low side of 37, or I might could get pull you in a little bit better there, I'm afraid. What's that station calling Florida? What's that station calling Florida?
Yeah, it sounds like even the guy in Florida is starting to fade out now.
Just a little quieter in your direction. 8309 up north, 235 out here in the ocean. Break. Hey, cat figure, you know I want an adoption agency, cat nigga. 873, I want an adoption agency, cat figure. If you need me, I'll adopt. Hey, Toya, gauge, good evening, break 09. Hey, Keystone Ball, jump. Hello, Keystone Ball, 911 in the Magnolia. Keystone Ball, 911 in the Magnolia. Goddamn. Don't get bad tonight. Ain't the time to get bad tonight. They're taking it real quiet over there. Leave them on the mark. Ain't the time to get bad. Bye.
Another prime example of absolutely horrendous audio. Modulation, too much of it, and way too much echo. You know, they call these two-way radios, or in this case, a radio telephone, usually indicates two-way conversations, meaning you need to be able to understand the other person. I'll never understand people with their horribly distorted audio. You can't even understand what the hell they're saying. Doesn't care if they're bending your needle, your receive needle, with such a strong signal. If you can't understand what the hell they're saying because their audio's so unclear, what use? Okay, so I guess that's about enough of that. So there you go. There's a Dak Mark X single sideband radio telephone restored and ready to be put back into service.